Hey all. Welcome to the channel, this is Six Path Weeb. You're now tuned into the ultimate anime fanfic zone on YouTube. Today's topic, what if Naruko faced Konoha as a straw hat? Yeah, we're diving deep into this wild crossover, Naruto meets One Piece style. Disclaimer. This channel is all about entertainment and anime discussion. I do not own any of the anime footage used. All rights and credits go to their rightful creators and copyright holders. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the multiverse. Let's start, guys. A high-pitched whoop broke through the calm serenity of a forest somewhere in the land of fire. Moments later, a swirling sphere of wind, roughly 10 feet wide, rushed through the air and cleared the surrounding trees with a mighty burst. A young girl stood at the center of the clearing, eyes wide in amazement as she gazed at the effects of her new technique. A bright smile spread across her face as she laughed, holding her arm, tired from the intense training, close to her side. Collapsing gently onto her back, Naruko let out a breath of satisfaction. She felt proud. Even though she knew her teacher might not be thrilled about how much chakra she had used, she couldn't wait to share her progress. Now, if only she could think of a name for the new jutsu. There you are, Uro-sennin. I've been waiting forever for you. Was the first thing the Toad Sage, Jiraiya, heard as he stepped into the inn room he shared with his energetic pupil. A few feet ahead stood Naruko, hands confidently on her hips, wearing the biggest smile he'd seen on her yet. He blinked in surprise. Normally, she would have greeted him with an annoyed pout for taking too long on his travels. Raising a curious eyebrow, Jiraiya cautiously eyed her. Was this a setup? You won't believe what I managed to do today while training, Naruko exclaimed, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Relieved that there would be no scolding this time, Jiraiya opened his mouth to ask more, but Naruko was already launching into her story with excited energy. I created a new jutsu, she declared, her eyes gleaming with pride as she waited for his reaction. Jiraiya's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He considered being skeptical, but one look at her beaming face made him pause. It wasn't like her to make things up. What kind of jutsu are we talking about? He asked with genuine curiosity. I call it Wind Release, Rasen Shuriken, she said, her voice practically sparkling with excitement at the name she had proudly crafted. Spinning Shuriken? Jiraiya repeated. Naruko nodded eagerly and tugged at his sleeve. Come on, I'll show you. You have to see it, it's so cool. With a light chuckle and a gentle protest, Jiraiya allowed himself to be pulled along, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm. He figured it was probably some wind-based enhancement for her shuriken techniques. Ever since she'd learned wind release, Rasengan, she had become fascinated with improving it. Jiraiya had expected it would take her a year to master, but she'd surprised him by accomplishing it in just a few months. When they reached the forest clearing where they usually trained, Jiraiya blinked in surprise. The area looked very different. The damage had noticeably increased since he last saw it. In the center was a large, round crater, roughly 8 to 12 feet wide and several feet deep. It definitely wasn't from any previous technique Naruko had demonstrated. Alright, watch closely and tell me what you think after I'm done. Naruko called, snapping the sage from his thoughts. She formed hand signs and attempted a shadow clone. Or tried to. Jiraiya began to sense something wasn't quite right. One clone appeared fine and stretched casually. The other, however, seemed unstable. Its form flickered slightly, and it wobbled uncertainly, barely able to stay upright. It muttered incoherently before vanishing in a gentle puff. Ha, that's never happened before, Naruko muttered, puzzled, but she simply shrugged it off and tried again, successfully summoning 2 proper clones this time. The trio moved into formation, preparing for the technique. Maybe you should rest first. Jiraiya started to say, sensing her energy was low, but she quickly shushed him with a smile. He watched silently, eyebrows furrowed, noticing the strain they were under, particularly in their right hands, but he trusted her judgment. Just as the jutsu began to take shape, Jiraiya's instincts flared. In a flash, he realized the buildup was unstable. The technique, now expanding rapidly, slipped from Naruko's grasp and struck her directly. Naruko slowly blinked open her eyes, which felt heavy and dry. It took effort, but eventually, she focused on the wooden ceiling above her. This wasn't the training ground. It looked like the ceiling of their shared-in room, though her memory was foggy. She tried to rub her eyes, but quickly realized something was off. Her body felt weighed down, and while she could wiggle her toes and move the fingers on her left hand, her right arm didn't respond at all. Before she could worry too much, she heard hurried footsteps and the familiar sound of wooden sandals rushing to her side. Naruko. You're awake, Jiraiya exclaimed, appearing in her line of sight. His expression was filled with relief. I was really starting to worry. Naruko tried to speak, but her voice cracked, coming out as a faint cough. Jiraiya quickly offered her a glass of water and gently helped her drink. Your jutsu caused a lot more impact than expected, he said carefully, watching her expression as she processed his words. The technique surged unexpectedly and affected your chakra pathways. He hesitated, clearly trying to find the best way to explain. After a moment, he took a deep breath and continued. You're all right now, and that's what matters most, but there's something you need to know. He looked down for a moment before meeting her eyes. The technique caused a disruption to your chakra flow. You'll need time to heal, and for now, it's possible you might not be able to use chakra-based techniques the same way. The words echoed in Naruko's mind. It was a lot to take in. As the realization settled over her, her thoughts swirled and faded into the haze of exhaustion. She gently drifted back into sleep. I'm sorry, Uro-sennin, Naruko said softly, catching the sage off guard. She had been quiet for days, long enough for Jiraiya to worry that she might never speak again, and now, out of the blue, she had spoken words he hadn't expected to hear. If anything, he believed he should have been the one apologizing. Sorry? About what? I should be the one apologizing for not paying more attention to your training. I should have been more careful to make sure something like this never happened, Jiraiya replied sincerely. He had been blaming himself all along. But I created the technique, Naruko insisted, her voice wavering between frustration and regret. You tried to warn me when the clone didn't work. I was just too stubborn to stop. Jiraiya didn't let her tone bother him. Instead, he sighed deeply, his expression a mix of guilt and compassion. Naruko didn't like that look, one filled with pity. She was used to being judged, not pitied. I could have pushed harder to stop you. Honestly, I might not have listened either if I were in your shoes, Jiraiya said quietly. He figured it was time to change the subject. How about we both take a little responsibility? Fair deal? Naruko thought about it for a moment, then gave a slow, solemn nod. Her gaze returned to her hands, she'd been watching them since she woke up. At least her right arm was moving again. Then suddenly, her eyes lit up with a thought. What about the Kyuubi? She asked, turning to Jiraiya with a spark of hope. It faded quickly when she saw him gently shake his head. I told you before, the attack passed right through you. And if the Kyuubi were still present, it would have given you its chakra to help. I haven't sensed any sign of its presence or its energy. Naruko felt completely drained. Though she didn't say a word, her mind was racing. Jiraiya looked at her again, his expression soft, and Naruko began quietly forming a plan in her mind. Jiraiya was working on the draft of his new book, admittedly not child-appropriate, when Naruko's voice called him back to attention. He looked up and motioned for her to speak. I can't become Hokage anymore, Naruko said, her voice filled with quiet sadness. Jiraiya felt his heart sink. He'd known this topic would come up eventually, but he had hoped it would wait until she was stronger. It seems that way, he admitted, unsure of what else to say. After a few moments of silence, he added, but maybe there's something else you want to do. You could be a writer like me, or maybe open a ramen shop. He immediately regretted the last part, but Naruko didn't seem to notice. She was lost in thought again. The silence stretched until Jiraiya heard a quiet sniffle. I can't bring Sasuke back, she cried, tears welling in her eyes. The change in her was heartbreaking. Only weeks ago, she was full of energy and determination. Now, she looked and sounded utterly defeated. Seeing her trembling, Jiraiya cast aside his tough image and pulled her into a comforting hug. I'm here, Naruko. It's not your fault, and no one's blaming you, he said, gently rubbing her back. Naruko shook her head, struggling to speak through the emotion. If I couldn't keep my promise to bring Sasuke back, how can I face Sakura, or Lee, or anyone? Her voice broke with each name. Then let's carry this burden together, Jiraiya offered. Everyone's training hard, trying to grow stronger. They haven't given up on Sasuke, and neither should you. But I'm his best friend, Naruko whispered. I have to be the one to bring him back. That's why I've been training. Jiraiya had no words left. All he could do was hold Naruko and let her know she wasn't alone. He realized then just how deeply she cared about her friend, more than he had ever imagined. I'm sorry to leave you alone, but I need to send this manuscript off to the publisher, Jiraiya said, standing near the door. If I don't, we'll be short on money, and we might have to live off cup ramen for a week. It's okay, Naruko replied quietly, her eyes focused on the window. She heard the familiar sound of Jiraiya's sandals as he walked away, and knew he'd return in a few hours. As soon as the sound faded, she opened her eyes and stood up. She moved quickly to the closet, pulling out a small backpack and a piece of folded paper. With a hesitant pause, she placed the letter where it could be easily found. Jiraiya had done his best to help her feel better, and she could see the guilt in his eyes. She felt a little bad for what she was about to do. When the Toad Sage returned, the letter caught his eye right away. The bag of ramen he'd brought as a peace offering dropped to the floor as he reached for the paper with a sinking feeling in his chest. Naruko was gone. In a daze, he unfolded the letter, clearly a farewell, and began to read. Dear Uro-Sennin. I'm heading out, not in a dangerous way, just stepping away for a while. I've tried telling myself that everything's fine and that I'll be okay, but honestly, it's been hard. I thought maybe I could be strong like Rock Lee, even without chakra, he's amazing, but I don't have that kind of strength in taijutsu. I can't imagine going back to Konoha feeling like I've become even less capable than before. I know this probably seems like running away, and maybe it is. But I don't know what else to do. If the Kyuubi is still inside me, then I'm still a Jinchuriki. I'm not naive, I understand that the only reason the villagers accepted me at all was because I was a shinobi doing my best to protect them. So, for now, I need space. Goodbye for now. Naruko. P.S. I left my forehead protector on the table, I don't think I'll be needing it anytime soon. I also left the necklace Tsunade Ba-chan gave me. Please give it back to her and let her know I'm sorry. She believed in me, and I feel like I let her down. If you could tell the others I'm sorry as well, I'd really appreciate it. The room was still. All 5 people inside were frozen in quiet disbelief. At the center, a blonde woman sat gripping a letter, her hands trembling slightly. Jiraiya stepped forward solemnly, placing a crystal necklace and a forehead protector on the table. As the letter slipped from her hands, the woman quickly reached for the necklace, as if needing to confirm it was really there. Jiraiya turned away, visibly burdened with regret. He blamed himself for not being there for Naruko when it mattered most. So, Naruko's gone too, murmured a pink-haired kunoichi, her voice unsteady. Tears fell freely as she bit her lip, trying to remain composed. The others could only watch in silence, each carrying their own sorrow. A man in his late 20s gently placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, setting aside the familiar orange book he usually kept by his side. In the corner, a quiet observer hugged a small piglet closer while glancing at the necklace. The sense of loss was heavy in the room. First Sasuke, and now Naruko. Konoha suddenly felt a little emptier. Hey! No money, no food. Naruko found herself just outside a restaurant, having been ushered out without ceremony. She landed softly and rubbed the spot she'd landed on, letting out a small sigh as her stomach rumbled in protest. She stuck her tongue out at the now closed door and gave a shrug. She'd figure something out. She always did. Naruko had been traveling for a couple of weeks now and found herself on one of the many islands in the land of water. She wasn't quite sure how she ended up there, she thought she was headed in the opposite direction, but she didn't mind. The boat ride had actually been nice. She discovered she liked the feeling of being on the sea. Maybe fishing wasn't such a bad idea. Her thoughts were interrupted by another loud growl from her stomach. She clutched it, trying to ignore the hunger. Just then, she heard a soft laugh. Well now, I thought a wild animal had made it to my doorstep with all that noise, a kind voice said. Naruko looked up to see a woman with a warm smile. But it seems it's just a hungry traveler. Naruko frowned a bit at the comment but stayed quiet. The woman tilted her head, studying her with a thoughtful expression. Naruko instinctively stepped back. Would you like some dinner? The woman asked suddenly. Naruko blinked, caught off guard. I just finished making dinner for my family. There's plenty to share if you'd like to join us. Still surprised by the offer, Naruko hesitated, unsure of how to respond. But the woman had already stepped aside, welcoming her in. After a moment, Naruko mumbled a small thank you and walked inside. The woman smiled warmly and led her through the house. For a brief moment, Naruko worried she might be walking into something strange, but after meeting the cheerful family of 4, her worries faded. Laughter and kind voices filled the evening, and for the first time in a long while, Naruko felt the warmth of kindness and hope. Sakura? The girl looked up from the stack of papers she had been organizing and noticed her Jonin instructor leaning casually on the table beside her. She blinked, startled. Had she really been so distracted that she didn't notice him arrive? Yes, Kakashi-sensei? She asked, giving her head a small shake as she tried to focus. Of course she hadn't noticed him, he moved with the quiet precision only a skilled ninja could manage. Sighing, Sakura returned to her paperwork, silently grumbling about how the Hokage had left her to handle all of it. Even if she had overindulged the night before, her duties as Hokage still stood. Not that Sakura didn't understand the need to unwind. If she were older, she might have done the same. Sakura? Kakashi gently placed a hand on her shoulder. His expression showed concern, his eyebrow slightly raised. Sakura blinked again, realizing she had zoned out and completely missed whatever he just said. Sorry, I'm just a bit tired, she admitted, offering a small, sheepish smile as she sat up straighter. Kakashi withdrew his hand and repeated himself calmly. I was asking if you wanted to come with me to check on Naruko's apartment. The Hokage thinks it's best we go through her things. As much as she hopes Naruko will return, she knows it may not happen soon. Sakura's expression softened. She turned away, lost in thought for a few moments. Eventually, she gave a quiet nod. The paperwork could wait. Some things were more important. Together, they left to visit their friend's apartment. A month had passed since Naruko left the village. A kind-hearted woman and her family had offered her a place to stay, welcoming her with warmth and support. They even told her about a local shop owner who was looking for help. Naruko didn't necessarily need the money, but the idea of having something to do felt right. Now, Naruko was walking through the familiar streets of the town, heading toward the antique shop she'd heard about. After taking a small wrong turn, she eventually found the place and stepped inside. The moment she entered, a mix of old paper and aged wood filled the air. Her curious blue eyes scanned the space, shelves lined with scrolls, ornaments, and historical artifacts. Vases and pots decorated with elegant designs filled the window display, while the walls were covered with paintings, clocks, and other preserved relics. Tables showcased tiny figurines, delicate trinkets, and other items that didn't quite fit elsewhere. Then, something unusual caught her attention. An elderly man was lying on the floor. Naruko's heart skipped. She hurried over and knelt beside him, quickly checking for signs of breathing. Thankfully, he was alive. Still, why was he lying there? Just as she tried to recall what to do next, she leaned closer. And then she heard it. A deep, rumbling snore. Naruko leaned back with an unimpressed look, watching as the man peacefully napped, a tiny bubble forming near his nose. She gave a gentle but firm call. Time to wake up, sir. The elderly man sprang up with surprising energy, so suddenly that Naruko fell backward in surprise. What? Where am I? I didn't misplace the groceries, he shouted, clearly startled. He turned to look at Naruko and pointed. Did you just call me an old-timer, young lady? Naruko blinked, trying to understand how someone could be so lively and dramatic all at once. She quickly got to her feet. I didn't mean anything by it, she replied. The man gave her a long, odd look. And then burst into laughter. He laughed for so long that Naruko began to wonder if he was always this quirky. So what brings a cheerful youngster like you into my shop? He finally asked with a wide smile. Despite his age, at least 80, he had the spark of someone still full of life. Cautiously, Naruko answered, I heard you're looking for help around here? The old man eyed her outfit and her youth. Orange pants and a slightly worn t-shirt weren't exactly a uniform, but he seemed to be weighing her words carefully. Depends. Can you lift things? My back isn't what it used to be. I can, Naruko replied confidently, though she didn't go into detail about how she was able to keep so fit. The man still looked a little unsure but extended his hand. All right then. You're hired. Name's Ryuga. Naruko shook his hand, firm and polite. She hesitated for a second. A few days into her journey, she had decided to use a different name, at least for now. It wasn't just about staying hidden from those who might be searching for her, it was also about taking a small step away from the life she had left behind. She smiled gently. Thanks, sir. My name's Sanji. Sakura gently wiped the sweat from her brow. Lady Tsunade had been pushing her harder than ever in training, and she was feeling the effects. Her muscles ached, and her mind wandered as she strolled through the familiar streets of Konoha. There was no particular destination in mind, just a quiet walk to clear her thoughts. Ever since her teammates had left the village for their individual journeys, a quiet emptiness settled in her chest. She understood that they had their reasons, and she knew there likely wasn't anything she could have done to stop them. Still, she carried a sense of guilt she couldn't quite shake. As she walked, her gaze lowered to the path beneath her feet. Distracted, she suddenly bumped into someone. Lifting her head, she was surprised to see Hinata Hyuga, the gentle and soft-spoken heir of her clan. What caught Sakura's attention most, though, were the tears glistening in the corners of Hinata's eyes. "Hinata?" Sakura asked softly, reaching out to help her up. The sight of Hinata's sadness immediately stirred Sakura's nurturing instincts. "Are you all right?" she added, her tone filled with concern. "I'm okay," Hinata replied in a trembling voice. "It's just Naruko." That was all Hinata could manage, but it was enough. Sakura gave a quiet nod, understanding washing over her. She gently took Hinata's hand. "Come on," Sakura said with a kind smile. "Let's go to Ichiraku's. My treat." Maybe she couldn't fix everything. Maybe the ache in her chest wouldn't go away just yet. But she could at least help a friend feel a little better. And maybe, along the way, find comfort herself. 3 months had passed since Naruko began her journey. After a few initial weeks spent assisting with basic tasks, like organizing storage and moving boxes, she settled in with Ryuga, a kind but eccentric man prone to sudden naps due to his narcolepsy. Since Ryuga lived alone, Naruko often found herself supporting him both at work and at home. To maintain some privacy, Naruko began going by the name Sanji. The alias became natural to her, although she occasionally slipped when someone used the name unexpectedly, something that likely tipped Ryuga off. Yet he never brought it up, and Naruko appreciated that quiet respect. For the first time in a while, she lived like an ordinary person. In this new place, no one knew about the QB sealed within her. People greeted her with kindness, chatted casually, and treated her like one of their own. The suspicious glares and whispers from her childhood felt like a distant memory. There was one close call when she nearly ran into people from her past. Inari and his grandfather happened to be visiting the area. Thankfully, Naruko had taken to covering her distinctive facial markings with makeup. The illusion held, and they never suspected who she really was. Naruko also changed her style, steering clear of her usual bright orange attire. Her hair had grown longer, and she looked, more than ever, like a completely different person. "Sanji, could you help lift that box?" Ryuga's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. With a small sigh, she obeyed. After setting it down, Ryuga looked at her thoughtfully. "Are you doing okay?" Naruko nodded, though her thoughts lingered elsewhere. Konoha still weighed heavily on her mind. The threat of the Akatsuki loomed, quiet, distant, but ever present. Even if the danger didn't feel immediate, she knew it would eventually catch up. Ryuga watched her carefully. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," he offered kindly, then turned to give her space. 6 months into her new life, Naruko had found a rhythm. She wasn't as energetic or loud as she once was, but she wasn't burdened by constant worry either. The fear of being found by the Akatsuki still lingered, yet she had come to accept it as part of her reality. She had even been entrusted with more responsibility. Ryuga had promoted her to manage the cashier's desk on busy days. But on this particular afternoon, she was back to dusting shelves when the shop bell chimed. Naruko turned instinctively, only to feel her heart skip. There, standing in the doorway, was Itachi Uchiha. Alone. Ryuga greeted the guest with his usual courtesy, but Naruko's instinct screamed. She knew she couldn't ignore the danger. "Run! This person is dangerous," she shouted to Ryuga. But Ryuga didn't heed the warning. Instead, he rushed forward and grabbed a decorative sword from the wall, charging to protect Naruko. Itachi barely reacted. With a single, calm motion, he sidestepped and gently pushed Ryuga aside, sending the older man tumbling into a display table. Naruko gasped and tried to rush to Ryuga's side, but Itachi was already there. She was pinned against the wall, her back pressed firmly against the antique wallpaper. She squeezed her eyes shut, resisting the urge to meet his gaze. "Curious," Itachi said. "You've disrupted your chakra flow. No wonder you've chosen to disappear." Naruko could feel his presence so close, it made her tense. She struggled to breathe, her hand brushing against a nearby shelf. Gripping the first object she could find, a small wooden sculpture, she hesitated for only a second. Then, with a burst of courage, she swung it toward him. To her surprise, it connected, and the brief moment of release allowed her to catch her breath. She dropped to the floor, chest rising and falling rapidly. But Itachi stepped forward again, pressing her down. Her chest ached, and tears formed in the corners of her eyes. She was overwhelmed, not just from fear, but from the helplessness of it all. "You're troublesome," Itachi muttered. Naruko braced herself, but a sudden noise interrupted them. Ryuga, refusing to stay down, had managed to rise again. With surprising strength, he threw himself at Itachi, forcing him away from Naruko. Shaken but determined, Naruko crawled away, her hand knocking over a scroll that had unrolled on the ground during the commotion. In the chaos, her hand slid across the parchment, smearing it with a faint mark, unbeknownst to her, activating its hidden seal. As Itachi turned toward her once more, everything around her warped. The world blurred, the air around her shimmered, and a strange dizziness took hold. Darkness filled her vision, and she slipped into unconsciousness as the scroll whisked her away. "Where is the Nine Tails?" a shadowy voice asked the lone figure standing silently in the heart of an empty cave. The figure kept her gaze fixed toward the far corner. "Gone." One of the ancient man's artifacts reacted to her energy and transported her elsewhere. "I tried to gather more details, but he refused to cooperate," the figure replied, her voice calm, her eyes unmoving as she listened to her superior. "No matter. I'll handle it." When Sanji awoke, he was met by the scent of salt in the air and the gentle sound of waves. Sitting up, he realized he was lying on a beach with a vast body of water stretching before him, undoubtedly the sea. Surprised he had survived whatever had happened, he stood and began exploring in search of other people. After a few minutes of walking, he came across a coastal town. It was small and bustling, seemingly centered around fishing. The streets were lined with stalls selling fresh catches and local produce. At the docks, ships of all sizes arrived and departed, many carrying goods. Though Sanji had lived as a civilian for years, his time as a ninja had left him with a few instincts, ones that now told him something about this place felt unfamiliar. So, he listened carefully to the conversations around him. That's when he began picking up on unusual words. One that stood out was belly, which, from context, seemed to be the currency. Hours of wandering brought him to an unexpected realization: he wasn't anywhere near the 5 great shinobi nations. According to what he'd heard from the townspeople, he was in a place called North Blue. Sanji sat at the port, tired and uncertain. With no money and no direction, he stared at the waves, weighing his limited options. That's when a young man approached and spoke kindly. "You all right, kid? You've been sitting here a while." The stranger took a seat beside him. He looked to be in his early 20s, with black hair and a round, friendly face. "It's not much, I'm just lost. I don't have any money or a place to go," Sanji admitted, unsure if he should say more. The man gave a thoughtful nod. "Then how about coming with me? We could use an extra hand in the kitchen," he offered warmly. Sanji looked at him in confusion for a moment. This guy was as unusual as someone he used to know, Ryuga. Who hires strangers like that? Still, he nodded and followed the cheerful man. "Great. And don't worry, it's not forever. When you're ready to set off on your own, you're free to go." The man grinned as he led Sanji along, chatting as they walked. It turned out the man worked aboard the kitchen staff of a cruiser ship. Sanji quickly connected with the rest of the crew and even began learning about the world around him. He discovered that life at sea held more joy and freedom than he ever expected. It was during this time that he uncovered a new passion: cooking. After 2 months aboard the ship, Sanji found himself with a dream. He had heard tales of a legendary sea known as the All Blue, a place where fish from every ocean came together. The more he read about it in the cruiser's library, the more he believed it truly existed. A part of him wondered why he was always drawn to dreams that seemed impossible, but a larger part, the determined part, refused to give up. He didn't let the teasing or disbelief from the others bother him. He simply kept going. When the cruiser was confronted by a pirate crew in the East Blue, only one part of Naruko remained: her determination. The name she had once used as an alias in her old world had now become her truth. Naruko was gone. And in her place stood Sanji. "Sanji. Meet." Echoed across the sunny deck of the Thousand Sunny. The cheerful voice belonged to a spirited young woman wearing a straw hat, energetically bounding up the stairs of the vibrant ship toward the galley door. The other few crew members on deck sighed knowingly, familiar with what was about to unfold. The young woman flung the galley door open, only to be met with the bottom of a shoe. With impressive force, the kick sent her sailing backwards over the railing and onto the soft grassy deck. "I've told you 1,000 times not to interrupt me while I'm cooking, Luffy. How many reminders will it take to make it stick?" The blonde chef called out in exasperation, brushing a hand through his hair. Nearby, where the straw hat captain landed, a red-haired navigator placed a hand over her face and returned to her sunbathing routine, treating the event as just another part of the day. The 9 quirky individuals known as the Straw Hat Pirates had just reached their first island in the New World. The island appeared to be uninhabited, covered in lush jungle and radiating peacefulness, so they decided to postpone any exploration and enjoy a brief, well-earned break. After all, No one could predict what challenges lay ahead in the unpredictable seas of the new world. Sanji exhaled heavily as Luffy began playfully complaining about the unfairness of the situation. Rubbing his eyes, the cook turned and shut the door behind him firmly, silently hoping for at least 30 minutes of calm. He retrieved a cigarette from his pocket and lit it, hoping the moment of quiet would settle his nerves. He returned to his place by the stove. As he stirred a creamy sauce and seasoned a piece of meat for frying, he couldn't help but wonder how someone could remain so boundlessly energetic. Granted, he had once been just as lively, but still. Outside the kitchen, laughter and playful shrieks echoed across the deck. Sanji flipped vegetables with a practiced hand to keep them from overcooking, smiling slightly when he heard the surprised shout of the swordsman. It was almost certainly caused by the three most playful members of the crew teaming up for a bit of mischief. Suddenly, the galley door burst open, and the long-nosed sniper dashed inside, closely followed by the determined footsteps of Zoro. "Help me!" the sniper cried, diving behind Sanji for cover. Rolling his eyes, the blonde chef quickly nudged them both out of the kitchen, insisting on preserving the sanctity of his workspace. He had barely let his hopes for peace rise when the door creaked open again, this time with less noise. Luffy, it seemed, had forgotten that Sanji possessed keen observation skills as well. "Luffy, out," Sanji said calmly, without even turning. A startled yelp followed, and the Straw Hat Captain murmured an apology before quietly exiting and closing the door. Maybe, just maybe, she was learning. Sanji allowed himself a faint smirk but shook the thought away. That was unlikely. The door opened once more, but the presence behind it this time was different, graceful, composed. It was their archaeologist. "What can I do for you, Robin Schwantilda?" Sanji greeted enthusiastically, momentarily abandoning the sizzling steak as he twirled around to face her. Robin offered her signature, mysterious smile, one that even made the ever-confident cook feel slightly on edge. "Just a glass of water, please. My throat feels a bit dry," she said with a soft laugh. With his usual flair, Sanji produced a glass at lightning speed. Robin chuckled gently behind her hand, and Sanji couldn't shake the feeling that she was privy to something he wasn't. Still, he smiled as he opened the fridge to fetch cold water. Within moments, she had a refreshing glass in hand. Nami also wanted to know when dinner might be ready. "She seems a bit overwhelmed by all the excitement outside," Robin added, placing the empty glass on the counter. Whether or not it was true, Sanji wouldn't dare question it if a lady asked for an update. "Tell her 15 minutes, he said with a charming smile. Robin returned the gesture and thanked him on her way out. As Sanji turned back to the stove and gave his full attention to the food once more, his expression softened. Life aboard the Sunny could be loud and chaotic, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. The 2 years he spent training and preparing for their reunion had been a challenge, but being back with his crew made it all worth it. Sanji stood alone in the center of a quiet clearing. He looked around in confusion. Just moments ago, he had been sitting by a bonfire with the rest of the Straw Hat crew, helping cook freshly caught fish. Now, he had no idea how he'd ended up in this unfamiliar, yet oddly recognizable place. A voice behind him made him turn quickly, instinctively preparing to defend himself. But he froze mid-motion when he saw who it was, Sakura. She stood there, her gaze intense and unreadable. "How could you?" she said quietly. Sanji furrowed his brows, puzzled. She looked just the same as he remembered her, even though it had been years since their last meeting. How had she not aged? And why did she seem taller than him? Glancing down at himself, Sanji noticed his hands were smaller, his clothing unfamiliar, a vivid orange outfit. He felt something snug pressing against his forehead, and before he could process more, Sakura repeated her words in an unsettlingly calm voice, staring at him with vacant eyes. "What are you talking about?" he asked uncertainly. "You let us down," another voice added. Sanji turned toward the sound and saw a man with silver hair and a covered eye, someone he clearly recognized. He gasped the man's name, but the only response was another phrase. "I'm disappointed in you." Flashes of blue and white danced across his vision as fragmented memories rushed back. The voices grew louder as more figures appeared, each echoing the same statements. Overwhelmed, Sanji shut his eyes tightly and covered his ears. The spinning sensation in his head intensified, and he felt as though the world was tilting beneath him. The voices became sharper, more distinct. He gritted his teeth, trying to shut it all out. Something seemed to press down on his chest. Sanji jolted awake with a gasp. He was struggling to breathe for a moment until he realized Usopp had rolled over in his sleep and landed on top of him. Gently, though still groggy and rattled by the dream, Sanji nudged his crewmate aside. Surprisingly, Usopp didn't wake. Sitting up and taking a deep breath, Sanji glanced around. They were back on the beach, the gentle flicker of the campfire glowing nearby, and their ship, the Thousand Sunny, sat anchored a short distance away. With a soft sigh, he got to his feet. Since sleep was clearly out of the question, he figured he might as well keep whoever was on fire watch company. That thought instantly became regret when he noticed the familiar green-haired swordsman leaning against a large log, seemingly half asleep. For a brief second, Sanji considered crawling back into his sleeping bag. But he knew he wouldn't be able to rest anyway, so with another sigh, he walked over. "Could you stop with the sighing? You're being loud," the swordsman grumbled, glancing at Sanji with his one visible eye. Returning the glare with equal energy, Sanji sat a few feet away from him and muttered under his breath. "Not in the mood, Moss Head." "Oh? Had a bad dream?" Zoro teased, his tone unmistakably sarcastic, so much so, even Luffy wouldn't have mistaken it for concern. "Drop it, will you?" Sanji replied, rubbing his temple. He was too exhausted to deal with Zoro's teasing. The dream had shaken him more than he liked to admit. It wasn't the first time he'd had it, and unfortunately, it probably wouldn't be the last. He didn't notice the way Zoro raised an eyebrow at him, though he caught the swordsman's slight scoff. "It was just a dream. Move on already," Zoro said flatly, his tone masking what might have been concern behind its usual bluntness. The quiet tension grew thicker, but eventually, the two slipped into one of their usual, harmless arguments, their banter slowly shifting the mood. As Sanji focused on coming up with clever retorts, the details of his dream began to blur, pushed to the back of his mind. Morning came, and as usual, the Straw Hat Pirates greeted it with a burst of energy, albeit slightly more subdued due to lingering drowsiness. Even half awake, they were still louder than most crews, whether pirate or marine. Eager to explore the island they had docked at, the crew had agreed to rise earlier than usual. Naturally, this was easier said than done for some of them. Luffy was already asking for meat from the moment he opened his eyes, calling loudly for Sanji. The blonde chef, still tired from restless sleep, responded with half-hearted yells, doing his best to meet everyone's breakfast needs. Usopp sat slouched at the table, barely keeping his eyes open and fending off Luffy's sneaky attempts to snatch food. Thankfully, Nami was seated nearby and smacked the captain's hand away when necessary. Sanji reinforced the message by lightly tapping Luffy's head with his foot, just enough to get the point across. Chopper happily nibbled on a muffin until one of Luffy's stretching arms swiped it right out of his grasp. The little doctor looked so devastated that Zoro, without a word, handed over one of his own sandwiches. Meanwhile, Frankie sipped cola and scribbled on his notepad, likely designing something innovative. Robin, seated beside Brooke, sipped her tea with a small smile as she watched the morning unfold. Once breakfast wrapped up, the crew began discussing how to split tasks for the day. After some spirited debate, they decided to divide into 3 teams, 2 to explore and 1 to stay behind and watch the ship. Team 1, the food gathering group, included Sanji, Zoro, and Chopper. Sanji and Zoro would hunt and gather ingredients, while Chopper searched for herbs and plants with medicinal properties. Despite initial complaints from the cook and the swordsman, the rest of the crew firmly encouraged them to go, with Nami particularly determined to have some peace. Chopper, ever selfless, agreed quickly, willing to support his crewmates however he could. Team 2 was set to explore and map the island. Naturally, Nami led this group, joined by Luffy and Usopp. Although the island seemed peaceful, Nami wasn't about to take chances, so she ensured one of the stronger members came along. Usopp preferred this arrangement as well, anything to avoid staying behind or being caught in another of Sanji and Zoro's endless bickering sessions. Team 3 remained aboard the Sunny. Robin was intrigued by the island but didn't mind waiting a day. Frankie was deeply immersed in his latest invention, and Brooke simply wasn't in the mood for trekking. With everyone in position, the crew was ready to begin another day full of adventure and discovery, just another chapter in their journey across the Grand Line. Adventure! The captain shouted enthusiastically, prompting either a restrained smile or a sigh from the crew. Unbothered by their reactions, the energetic youth turned to the ship's cook and swordsman, her expression unusually serious. "Sanji. Zoro. Make sure you gather all the meat you can." With that, she darted off into the jungle, her team hurrying to follow her lead. The rest of the crew shook their heads at the rubber captain's usual antics and split up into smaller groups to explore the island. Dash. Luffy, wait up. Not all of us can keep running through this endless thicket. Usopp complained, wiping sweat from his brow. They'd been trekking for hours, and the ever-enthusiastic captain remained the only one unaffected by the heat. Nami rolled her eyes but didn't comment. By now, they all knew what to expect. After a while, it became clear the island posed no significant threat. Usopp eventually gave up trying to catch up and resumed chatting with the young woman beside him. Watch where you're cutting. You nearly hit me. Then don't get in the way, curly brows. What did you just call me, Mosshead? Exactly what it sounded like, curly brows. Unbelievable. Just focus on cutting. Chopper sighed and quietly examined a unique plant he'd come across, letting the usual banter fade into background noise. Is that a three-headed monkey? Indeed, Robinson. The wildlife in the New World is incredibly unusual. Evening arrived swiftly. As they had predicted, the island was small and uninhabited. Aside from the occasional strange animal, nothing seemed alarming, although the eerie calm gave them a feeling that something unexpected might occur. Robin voiced this concern out loud, much to Usopp's dismay, who whimpered about her talent for discussing ominous topics like she was talking about the weather. The atmosphere shifted when Luffy suddenly froze mid-bite, confirming everyone's suspicion that something was indeed amiss. Are you kidding me? Zoro muttered, his instincts on high alert. The cook, Sanji, also paused, a deep frown forming on his face as he sensed something disturbing. A presence, ominous and powerful, was swiftly approaching them. The three hockey users stood ready, signaling the rest to prepare for an encounter. Weapons were drawn and dinner utensils tucked away as the strange energy surged toward them, only to vanish just as abruptly. Zoro gripped his sword tighter. A dark figure, cloaked and wearing an unusual spiral-patterned mask, suddenly appeared further down the beach. Zoro had already unsheathed his sword, anticipating confrontation. The figure moved slowly toward them as Luffy, uncharacteristically cautious, stepped forward. Who are you? She asked, her gaze firm as the stranger chuckled, not playfully, but with clear irritation and hostility. That doesn't concern you, the masked individual said. I'm here for the blonde. All eyes turned to Sanji, who stood rigid, visibly tense. He tried to control his breathing and sweat, though his unease was evident. Zoro, puzzled by the cook's reaction, turned his full attention back to the cloaked figure. Why exactly? You're part of the Akatsuki, aren't you? Sanji interrupted, his voice sharp. The crew turned toward him, surprised by the accusation. The stranger's response was a slow, chilling laugh. Even better. I am the Akatsuki. He tilted his head slightly. You've caused me quite the inconvenience, Sanji. Years I've searched for you. Who would have thought someone from Konoha could stay hidden this long? Remarkable, really. Sanji glared. You came for nothing. The Ninetales hasn't been seen in years. The Straw Hat crew exchanged confused glances. Luffy was still trying to piece together the situation, while Zoro and Robin kept close watch on Sanji, clearly sensing deeper history between him and the stranger. Is that so? The man said. Then you won't mind coming with me. Forgive me if I don't believe your claim. He stepped forward, prompting Luffy to spring into action. You're not taking Sanji, she shouted, launching a powerful punch. Her arm stretched across the beach, but missed. The stranger had vanished just before impact. The crew spun around as his unsettling voice sounded behind them. A fascinating ability, but ineffective against me. He now stood behind Sanji, reaching out. Sanji couldn't move at first, frozen in place. But just as the man reached for him, a flash of steel cut the air. Zoro had intervened, blade swinging to block the attack. You didn't dodge that one. Having trouble predicting? He teased, pleased to see the stranger's eye twitch in annoyance. Behind him, Zoro heard Sanji calming himself, likely lighting a cigarette to steady his nerves. The rest of the crew checked on him while Zoro drew another sword, Sandai Kaitsu, eager for battle. Careful, swordsman. The masked figure growled. But his gaze drifted back to Sanji. When the man moved again, Zoro launched a counterattack. The stranger, instead of dodging, blocked with a concealed dagger. Though small, it was clear he was trained for close-quarters combat. Zoro didn't underestimate the weapon. As the two clashed, Zoro finally got a better look at the masked man's eye. At first he thought it was just red, but now he saw a distinct pattern, like a swirling pinwheel. Zoro! Sanji suddenly shouted. Don't make eye contact. Avoid his gaze. Zoro hesitated but obeyed, choosing to focus on the man's hands instead. Sizing up his opponent, Zoro realized this figure wasn't necessarily there to fight. He could if provoked, but his objective was clear, Sanji. Zoro frowned. Based on the conversation, Sanji had been evading this group, the Akatsuki, for years. When they met, he'd been working in a floating restaurant, hesitant to leave. That life of anonymity now made more sense. Zoro sighed. Things were about to get far more complicated. Sanji was genuinely relieved he had picked up the habit of smoking. The overwhelming tension had started to ease now that he had a little nicotine in his system, allowing him to think more clearly. He never imagined that the Akatsuki would manage to follow him into this world. When he first arrived, he had been confident they wouldn't be able to cross over. Yet here he was, facing one of them, and not just anyone, but a member of the Uchiha clan. As he took another drag from his cigarette, he couldn't help but wonder if the individual had obtained the Sharingan in a way similar to how Kakashi had, by transplant. He was certain this wasn't Itachi or Sasuke. Sasuke would have said something dismissive or cold by now. But this person spoke about Konoha as if they had never even set foot in the village. "Sanji, are you all right?" Usopp whispered nearby. Sanji turned and caught the worried looks of his crewmates. Offering a small smile, he gave a reassuring nod to let them know he had settled down. He turned back to the standoff, watching as Zoro faced off against the cloaked stranger. The man had referred to himself as Akatsuki, which made Sanji assume he played a major role in their operations. What puzzled Sanji more than anything was the motive. He hadn't been exaggerating when he said the Nine Tails hadn't shown any signs of activity. In fact, even the seal that once marked Naruko had almost completely faded, along with the whisker-like markings she used to have on her face, right around the time they arrived in this world. Sanji clenched his jaw. The man was clearly dangerous, that much he could sense, even without haki. That black cloak with red clouds was more than enough to signal it. Despite his sharp instincts, Sanji was struggling to come up with a plan. It seemed the shock of the ninja's sudden appearance had thrown him off balance. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a collective gasp from the crew. Zoro was now darting around the battlefield, dodging streams of flame that the masked figure was launching with sweeping gestures. Sanji's sharp gaze tracked the fiery threads carefully. Thanks to that attention, he spotted a threat just in time. He dashed forward, catching one of the fire lines with his shoe before it could reach Zoro's neck. Slamming his foot down, he pinned it and managed to restrain one of the man's fingers in the process. The clash paused as the two combatants noticed Sanji's interference. "What are you doing, Cook?" Zoro shouted, glaring. Sanji frowned slightly but lifted his chin with calm determination. "He's after me. Let's not forget that," he muttered, though he wasn't eager to admit he was acting more on instinct than strategy. He knew Zoro could have dodged the attack on his own. Still, his focus remained fixed on the stranger's fingers, anticipating any movement. Zoro gave a skeptical huff but said nothing more. Sanji was finally ready to fight, but it seemed the masked man had no interest in continuing. "This is pointless," the stranger muttered and suddenly vanished. Sanji and Zoro spun around, expecting him to reappear behind them, but instead, Nami's startled scream filled the air. The man had appeared directly in front of Nami, reaching out toward her in the same strange motion as before. Brooke, who had been standing beside her, instinctively reached out to protect her, stepping forward with his sword at the ready. Luffy was close as well and quickly grabbed her arm to pull her away. But they weren't fast enough. The stranger conjured a swirling dark vortex, and all three were drawn into it, vanishing in an instant. "Nami! Luffy! Brooke!" Usopp and Chopper cried out in unison. The rest of the crew stared in stunned silence at the spot where their friends had just stood. Sanji's chest tightened with worry, and he could feel that the others were just as shaken. The memory of what happened at the Sabaody archipelago still haunted them. Unexpectedly, it was Usopp who recovered first. He pulled out his slingshot and launched a pop green directly at the masked figure. The projectile sailed through him effortlessly, shocking the crew. The moment of distraction made the sniper vulnerable, and Robin and Frankie reacted instantly, pulling him back before he could be caught by the vortex as well. Sanji quickly realized none of them wanted to be separated again, not after what happened the last time. Acting on that thought, he grabbed Zoro by the coat and hurried toward Chopper. He barely managed to take hold of the small doctor when the now familiar sensation of being pulled through space washed over him. As darkness closed in, Sanji noted that, unlike the previous time, he didn't feel the same dizziness. Just quiet, consuming blackness, and a determination to stay together, no matter what came next. Dear YouTube family. That's all for now. Thank you for watching and supporting, your love means the world to me. Stay tuned for more awesome content coming your way. Much love. 6 Path Weeb.